Hey guys, that's a little bit of a treat when I have like 2 or 3 full hours to work with the time lapse. In Sony Vegas, I can do those really cool animations, and we finally had some really interesting weather to look at over the weekend, but for today we have dried out. Not much going on there. Sun is starting to sink out there to the west, and let me see if I can bring up what it looks like right now. Go to our live shot. Yeah, and that's what it looks like at this time. So pretty clear compared to the past couple days. Okay, so we'll head on to the charts here and see what brought about this change. First thing that we should look at is the prevailing flow, and we see that we're starting to kind of return to seasonable normals here. South flow, this is kind of what we saw all through July last year. And it doesn't look like even the sea breeze has done very much. So there has been a change over the past 24 hours. And we see that we do have a few storms out in Georgia, Alabama, and Florida. But even there, the coverage is a lot less than what we had yesterday. And let's see what's going on out in the west. We had a pretty strong heat wave in the northern plains, the southern plains, showing something like a monsoon. So probably the very strong heating, we had like almost 120 degrees again in this area. That's probably carried a little bit of moisture into Arizona and Utah as the thermal low gets active out in that area. All right, let's head to the surface charts and see what's going on across the country and see what's going on with the heat wave. And I haven't looked at anything, so this is all new to me also. And I see we have broken that heat wave. Instead of not 105, but 95, we're down to 78 in Alberta. So a big change as that Pacific air sweeps in. And you'll notice that we don't have like a whole lot of westerlies in this area. And that's very common due to the mountain range being right through here. That tends to disrupt a lot of the deep westerly flow due to friction. And we get more of a, I mean, you can definitely see the westerly component there, but it's not as powerful as what we have here on the Central Plains. Central Canada also looking pretty mild, and we can kind of pin down the baroclinic low. Looks like it is right in this area here. I guess that would be around Regina, Saskatoon somewhere. No, Saskatoon's up north. But you can see the very warm temperatures there in southeast Saskatchewan. 95 at whatever station that is. And the downslope area, you can see that here. 98 in eastern Montana. So that is where the hot area is. So very easy to find the front. Maybe a little further back, something like that. And then there is going to be a corresponding warm front. And the way to find that, we just take a look at the area to the south, compare it to the area up to the north, and we find where it starts changing as we go from south to north. So 88, 86, 87, 91. Okay, that's still pretty hot. Okay, now we've dropped off to 81 and 69. So that's going to put our front roughly like this right there. Then we pick up the cold front kind of back in here, and that is our frontal system. Centered in Saskatchewan, but part of it extends there into the U.S. itself. And we've broken the heat wave also in South Dakota. We had 105 there at Phillipsburg, and we're down to mid-80s. Part of that's due to the upslope flow, which gives us adiabatic lift, and that means adiabatic cooling. Kind of the opposite of compressional lift. Okay, let me take a look at the chat, make sure everything's looking good. Got Round Chalfont and Alexi EAS Fan 51, 80 Holmes, Eddie W. We got two Eddies. Ryan Toomies and Michael Burrell, Kevin McKinney, Burl H., Justin, David Donut, David Moore. Finally, a dry day in the Metroplex today. For those of you outside the U.S., the Metroplex usually refers to Dallas-Fort Worth. Alexei talking about time-lapse videos. Brett Dean mentioning a heat wave tomorrow with climbing dew points 81 degrees in southern Jersey. Did I get the message on Facebook? No, I'm not on Facebook that often, probably once a week, so you definitely want to send messages to my email. That's going to be the fastest. I only check Facebook about every 10 days or so. Air quality warning in Alberta from wildfires, from Dave there. Kevin McKinney says hot in North Little Rock. Wet weekend predicted. Ryan mentioning flights delayed 2 hours this evening due to severe weather and storms jamming up the aviation routes. Sue M says Weather Service predicting severe weather later this week. It's been hot in Bell County where Alexei is. Wow, that's pretty... It's not too far from here. We're only 79 right now, so I think we've got that boundary in the area. Something is keeping it from firing. Let's take a look at the chart and see what's going on. Yeah. Look at that, 96, 97 in the Austin area. Contrasts very sharply with 80s in East Texas and even 84 there at Lufkin. So in between, I think we've got the outflow boundary. Just kind of, this is from yesterday's convection. It's still there. And I think we've got a cap in place. Storms going up on Tucson where hiker AZ is. Ryan sent over the recon mission from NHC. I appreciate that. I took a brief look at that, and I will show that here shortly. Carl Berghoff mentioning pictures. Eric Hall, Spring Hill, Florida, hot and humidity all day. Thomas Fortner, hello from the road. Saw the anvil from the tornado warning storm in Minnesota last eve, and Thomas Fortner says phenomenal lightning show. Okay, yeah, we do have that some sort of front or boundary moving through the northern plains, and do you see it here? You can definitely see it by the contrast in the winds. So there it is. South of that, we got temperatures in the 90s or upper 80s and upper 90s in Kansas. In the north of that, we've got cooler air in Minnesota. And along this boundary, we do have thunderstorms forming, and I pulled up the Quad Cities radar, and there's our storms. We got a tornado warning right there on the Mississippi River. Let's take a look at that warning there. Radar indicated rotation, and it's moving southeast at 30. That's over Nauvoo. Must be a Native American word there. Okay, so let's see. This is not really a classic supercell appearance here. In fact, it's got, if anything, kind of a bow echo appearance here. But let's go to the storm relative velocity and check out things. Shear profiles in here look very... I don't see a whole lot of gradients in here. There's a little something at that spot right there. But I'm just not really seeing much here. We'll try going up to the next higher tilt, 0.9, and I don't know, there's something here. We have inbounds right there, outbounds. Yeah, that's cyclonic. Let me put a mark there and see what that is. That's on the backside of the storm. It's kind of an unusual area. I'm not sure exactly what that is. And then looking out ahead of the line, got a little bit of cyclonic rotation there. out ahead of the storm. This is going to be kind of a northwesterly flow storm. You can kind of see it moving on towards the southeast. And it probably looked a little bit different earlier. This is about 20 minutes ago. Let's check out the velocity signatures. And yeah, there's something right here. Very tight bit of rotation. Looks like it's very transient, whatever it is. And then they may be looking at this from another radar, because I don't really see what they're going for right there. But anyway, that's the storm. Next one down the line, right there, looks like this is going to be Peoria. Where's Peoria? Yeah, it's going to be southwest of Peoria there, and then another cell right there near Bloomington. So storms along the boundary right there. It looks like we got a few out in Sue and Sarah's territory. Tornado warnings all through Indiana. And let me pull those up just real briefly here. And I do have some satellites, so let me bring that up for you guys. And that's a look at the storms from GOES 16 just a few minutes ago. So there's the storms along the Missouri-Iowa border, extending all the way back to Indiana. And you can see the breaks on the line right there. There's one break, and yeah, that's the main one right there. So that gives us kind of a tail end storm here in north central Indiana. And let's see if the radar came up. Yeah. Doesn't look like really a classic supercell signature there, but we'll go to the velocity. A lot of range folding in this area. And this storm here, yeah, that's definitely showing a mesocyclone. We got to keep in mind the radar is down to the south. We have strong inbounds and strong outbounds and strong inbounds here. And notice the slight diagonal shape to this dipole here. In other words, the radar is down to the south. One part of that dipole is right there, the other is here, and that gives us kind of like a little bit of diagonal tilt. So this is showing us that we've got a little bit of convergence in addition to the rotation. That's rotational convergence. And that's what we would expect with a supercell, with a mesocyclone, and especially with a tornadic storm. So that's going to be just south of Kokomo, and I'm going to put a dot right there in the center. And there it is. If you had the old Weather Service radars from the 70s and 80s, you would probably not catch that. You would have to use some of the other techniques that we had at the time, which would be looking at higher tilts. Forecasters would look for patterns in the cell top heights. They would look for like rapid growth of the tops to high levels like 55, 60,000, and usually like if they would look for collapses in the tops, and that seemed to be associated with the onset of tornadogenesis. And when you think about that, the collapse of the tops, that would be kind of associated with the outflow picking up and spinning up the tornadic circulations there. Because the outflow is very important for tornadogenesis. It's not just the updraft there. Okay, so that's what's going on in Indiana. So let's head through the charts and see what's going on elsewhere. Got a slight risk right there in the northern plains and also in the Midwest. And then taking a look out in the Atlantic, we've got this one wave gradually working its way westward. Yesterday we saw it near the Cape Verde Islands right there. Let me see if that's showing. Yeah, it is. Okay. So we got a 0% chance of cyclone formation in 48 hours. Environmental conditions are marginally conducive to development. But the GFS has been trying to take this system and develop a hurricane as it moves into the Gulf and across the Gulf Stream. So that could still happen, but we're just not going to know for another week or so here. The track on this system, pretty much heading towards Trinidad and into the Caribbean, so that's going to be kind of a ways off here. And then the eastern North Pacific there, we've got Eugene, and then this other disturbed area here. Usually these don't affect the United States. Typically they move to the west-northwest like that. Occasionally one will recurve, especially if we have a trough up to the north. Like in this area here, that'll pick up the tropical cyclones and recurve them. And if those hit the mountains in this area here, we can have some very high precipitation totals. Places like Arizona, Tucson, and even in Texas. One of my jobs back in the 90s was training in new forecasters, and one of the things I would tell them is that if we had tropical cyclones crossing the Rockies like that, then you should be careful not to underestimate the precip, because you can get a whole lot of rainfall out of those systems. Okay, this is the NHC reconnaissance that Ryan sent, and if you want to check this out, it's nhc.noaa.gov/recon.php. And this just shows that they're looking at one of the systems out there. I'm not going to get too much into the weaker systems, but if they're starting to look like they're going to affect the U.S., then we'll check those out. Okay, 250 millibar analysis. We've got ridging there in the northern plains. We got to keep in mind that this is this morning here. So kind of a shortwave, maybe a medium wave ridge across the northern plains like that. And we've got a new system moving onto the Pacific coast right there. As far as Texas, it looks like we're breaking up that upper level trough. You can see the flow is now kind of uniform. Looks like maybe our trough has moved eastward. We'll check it out with the 250 millibar chart, and indeed looks like the troughing is now mostly east of the Mississippi. Looks like maybe a little bit of ridging getting established there in West Texas. Maybe that's helping to shut things down temporarily. Let's see what the temperatures are out there in West Texas. Because usually when we have an upper level high, we're looking for very hot conditions. And yeah, it looks like around Midland, 96. That's up there, 97 in the Fredericksburg area. And then at 500 millibars, we do see a big change. You remember in Little Rock and Shreveport and Fort Worth yesterday, we saw -8. Now we've got -6. So there's been some warming in the mid-levels, and that usually means capping. And we were talking yesterday about how the storms we had yesterday thrived on the steep lapse rates and how important the mid-level temperatures were, and now those have kind of backed off and warmed, so now we don't have that instability. We do see a little bit of the southerly flow across Texas, and it looks like some strong anticyclonic curvature there, so that's starting to show the influence of the Bermuda High kind of nosing in across the central or the southern U.S. there. Okay, let's see. Moving on here, there's the infrared imagery. And so not very much going on, just a little bit of convection there in southeast Texas, but pretty clear across the Central Plains, and I'm going to show you a couple of scutees from this area here. Because if we go to the water vapor imagery, you can see this very dry area from about Ardmore, Oklahoma, all the way to Atlanta. This is what the polar orbiter imagery looked like earlier today, and yeah, it looks like there is a bit of an outflow boundary across the Houston area. And I'm kind of looking for bubble shapes, and I am seeing something like that. And this is also supported by the very cool temperatures we have right now, and we've got 79 right now. We're underneath this cold dome southeast of Dallas, and that contrasts very strongly with what we have in the whole country. Okay, that brings us to the thickness and isobars. There's that Hudson Bay vortex right there. It shifted southward a little bit from yesterday, but let's check out that polar orbiter imagery, because those systems, they do look pretty awesome. So there's those spiral bands across the Hudson Bay area, and this is basically a cold core barotropic system. So it's full of cold air, and as you go higher and higher in the atmosphere, you get even stronger low pressure, low heights aloft. Somewhere down to the south, we're going to find the frontal system, and yeah, we just went over that actually. Let me bring up the borders. And you can see there in Saskatchewan, there's the warm advection sector. Remember, we found that warm front. If we kind of like go back several hours, probably what we had is a cold front coming through like this, and then a warm front like that right there. So what you can see here is the flow from the south overriding the warm front and ascending, and that's given us this stratiform area up in central Saskatchewan right there. And we can diagnose this with isentropic analysis charts. And we've got a few seminars on that. If you go back through the archives on this channel, I think we would have to go back to about November or December, but we have talked about these that isentropic type of analysis. And yeah, there's that smoke there in Alberta. See that very hazy color? Now, I'm not sure what the origin of the smoke is. I think it may have come from Alaska, or maybe Northwest Territories. We had some fires way up here with the very warm temperatures, and there are some very cool products on the polar orbiters for finding the smoke. And let me see if I can show that to you guys. What we can do is we can add layers. And it's been a while since I've used these, but I think the one I looked at was aerosol optical depth. And I think they may have some specialized smoke products too, but let me just bring up one of these and see what we got. The problem is cloud material does tend to interfere with this data, but you can kind of see this hot spot right in here where we have the breaks. And we used this last summer to find dust coming from the Sahara. And we haven't done this at all this year, but last July we had a couple of week-long periods of very poor visibility. And we were trying to figure out where that was coming from. A lot of times in the southern U.S. we assume that haze and stuff like that comes from Ohio, because indeed during the cold season, that is the case. A lot of the haze comes from the Rust Belt right there. But during the summer, the origin is Africa. And we showed a case of this. This may have been like around July 5th, maybe, last year, where one of these blobs kind of moved eastward with the trade winds and made it into, or westward and made it into Texas. So it looks like there's one right there. And if we zoom in, yeah, look at that mess right here. This is a lot of dust coming off the African coast. And here's another red area. Again, we're looking at the aerosol optical depth product. This is on that NASA polar orbiter imagery. So this next shot is right here in the Caribbean. There's Puerto Rico right here. So we're going to see this probably working into Mexico or Texas in several days, because the flow tends to be like this time of year. So we're going to watch for haze to make it into the Gulf in a few days. So hopefully I'll come back here tomorrow and see what the progress on this is. That'll give us another thing to look at. Okay, for soundings, let's look at that dry slot. And I think for that I'm going to go to Springfield, Missouri. And yeah, there's the sounding for this morning. And it's showing a little bit of low-level moisture right here. But the water vapor product is sensitive mostly to mid and upper level moisture. So we're seeing a lot of dry air here in the upper levels. So the sounding here kind of verifies what we have on the water vapor product. And then the sounding for Fort Worth, let's check that out. Maybe we'll construct a lifted parcel with maybe 92 degrees Fahrenheit. So let's bring that up. Then we'll mix the lowest 100 millibars. We bring that up along the mixing ratio lines like that. And it looks like we got a bit of capping. And by capping, I mean this area here in yellow. Looks like we got a layer right in here of warm air from about, looks like about 4,000 up to about 8,000 feet. So that's kind of odd. Normally when we look for the cap, we look at the 700 millibar chart. In this case, it looks like we need to look at 850 to find out where the capping is. So let's just take a quick look at 850. And there we can see there's the 21 Celsius that was providing capping there at Fort Worth. And if we draw the isotherms, that gives us an approximation of where the capping is. So this probably originated in the higher terrain of Mexico here and advected northward. So whatever it is, it's helping to keep things kind of shut down. And when you think about it, 68 degrees up at 5,000 feet, that's some very warm air indeed. All right, let's see. What do we have next? I think that's it for those charts. I think we can head into the forecast here. It's looking pretty dark out already. Let me bring up that camera outside. I'll take another look at chat. Sun is going down and we're clearing on out. Let's see here. Yeah, there's a lot of discussion in chat, so I'm going to have to skim through this. Otherwise, I'm going to bore a lot of people here, but some discussion about a tornado there in Indiana 2 years ago, EF3. Sue M bets that Sarah is chasing. Skip Talbot was tracking 7,000 Cape in western Illinois on Saturday. Yeah, they had some very hot temperatures there over the weekend. Ryan says the dry air in the Atlantic and high shear aloft is killing any possible development at this time. And the Bermuda High, which we just discussed, is pretty strong, and that's helping to keep us separated from the deep tropics. Sue M. asking if there's any Canadians here. Good question. I'm curious myself. And a little discussion about Facebook on here. And Ryan says South Florida looking for a massive rain event on Thursday and Friday with moisture coming in. Let's see. Had some notes here. Let me go through this real quick. Yeah, I wanted to mention all the work that goes into this program because I didn't really thank everybody that's on Patreon. Our Patreon donors, let me just go ahead and give out these names. David Moore, Lloyd McCarter, Ryan Toomeys, John Booma, Sarah Wood, Jeremy Mattingly, Robert Vermillion, Steve Witt, Ron Chalfant. And those are our bigger donations, and I appreciate that support. And Andrew Klope, Burl Henry, Alexi Walsh, Mike Wan, Tom Johnson, Jason Fenley, Michael O'Neill, Thomas Fortner, Theodore Kemper, Kevin McKinney, Sean Huntington, and Robert Terrell. And even for those of you that are just sending like $2 or $3, it adds up, and I definitely appreciate it. And that helps me because this program is a lot of work. Like tonight, I had to work on the visuals there and do all the time lapse. That took a couple of hours. I have to pull together all the information and check through email. There's also the technical preparations. I got to make sure that all the windows are set up the way they're supposed to and that I don't have any private information up, that kind of thing. I got to make sure I've got rest and that I'm balancing things between work and the videos. And the Patreon support definitely helps take the pressure off me where I don't have to worry that I'm neglecting the books and the software. So there's the Patreon card right there if you want to sign up for that. And if not, you can continue watching for free, of course, but every little bit does help there. So let's head into the forecast. And normally we start with the mesoscale. This is the high-resolution rapid refresh, and it looks like we've got those storms there in Indiana and Illinois modeled pretty well. It's not showing that gap quite as well, and the storms do extend a little bit further west, but the overall pattern is what we're looking for here. So it looks like a little bit of southeastward drift, and they break off into two separate clusters, one in Illinois, one in Ohio. This is around 1 to 2 in the morning. And then it looks like they fall apart before dawn. And then we get the southern MCS rolling in from Nebraska. So there's a lot of concentration of convection along this east-west boundary there in the Midwest. For Texas, also pretty quiet here. We run the mesoscale model forward, a little bit of convection around the Lake Sabine area. But it is very quiet, and there's that usual nocturnal convection right there along the coast. Looks like that kind of spreads in there around midday into the Beaumont and Lake Charles area. Okay, let's take a look at the precipitable water. Very important this time of year. And it looks like we got the higher amounts in northern Florida right here. Surrounding that, we've got 2 inches all the way from southern Georgia to East Texas. And then extending down the mostly the west coast of Florida right there. So what happens to all that moisture? Let's see here. There's a slight northward drift because we're dominated by the broad scale southerly flow, the Bermuda High, transporting some of the water vapor and air northward. Okay, so it reaches Tennessee, Arkansas, but we can see the prevailing westerlies up in the Great Lakes right here. This is moving a different direction, parallel with a jet stream like that. So what we're seeing here is more shortwave energy and frontal system type activity. So we have the southern area moving southward through the Great Lakes later in the week. And it looks like we have some sort of front pushing southward over the weekend. And then we get to the end of the NAM run. But just off the coast, you can see that one system there, that one hurricane. There it is, and you see the very high precipitable water amounts there. That's about 2.5 to 3 inches. That's a lot of water vapor there. Okay, so let's look at the boundaries over the next couple days and the dew points. So once again in Texas, we're returning to seasonable, typical type southerly flow. We've got the cyclogenesis here in the high plains, kind of a thermal low in western Kansas there, and north of that, there's our frontal system. And we already talked about the alignment of that cold front, something like that. Warm front and cold front like that. And moisture feeding up northward. Okay, so that makes sense. And then we've got a little bit of this dry air here in Tennessee. Remember we talked on water vapor about how there's this dry air. In fact, let me show that to you real quick. Yeah, you see that dry air there from Atlanta to southern Oklahoma. When we get heating during the day, you're going to transport that dry air down to the surface. So that's going to bring the dew points down quite a bit. And that's what we're seeing there on the GFS data. Let me bring that up here again. There it is. You can see that dew point weakness there. That's 50s dew points. So when we do the forecast tomorrow night, it's going to look like this. Deep southerly flow in Texas. There's our frontal system there in the Dakotas. Cold front probably something like that right there. We've got 70s dew points there in Iowa and Illinois, so probably another shot of storms, maybe an MCS through that area. Then into Wednesday. Not a whole lot of change. The cold front sinking into the central plains right there, driven by this high pressure area in Ontario. Then by Thursday, high pressure sinking into the Great Lakes, continuing to drive the front into the Ohio Valley and into Kansas right there. See that cyclogenesis right there in Kansas? That's going to start an upslope pattern here just north of I-70, affecting like Binkelman, North Platte, Ogallala, all through there. So maybe a bit of chaseable weather there. Then for Friday, high pressure just kind of stagnating there over the Midwest. Looks like maybe our boundary sinking into Arkansas there, so chances for precipitation in Arkansas. And the reason I picked Arkansas is because that's in close proximity to the deep moisture near the Gulf of Mexico. However, looks like a lot of the moisture is actually heading westward into Texas there. And for the weekend, let's see here. Not much change. Looks like some boundaries gradually push southward, just kind of a slow progression of this system into the southern U.S. So probably some precip chances going up later, maybe around the weekend. And now you can see we've got this upslope pattern in Texas. And then for, let's see, the middle of next week, not much change, just high pressure across the Midwest right there, and pretty much dominated by the Bermuda High. Southerly flow in Texas, so wherever we have cooler temperatures aloft in the mid-levels, we'll have chances for precip in our part of the country down here in Texas. And for that, we have to go up to 200 millibars. That's a chart that's pretty important, and we'll just run through this real quick. Starting out right now, you can see a little bit of that troughing there in Oklahoma, and then over the next few days, looks like an upper level low there in South Texas, so probably some precip chances here. Ridging in the central U.S. right there, so that's going to keep things kind of shut down in that part of the country. And then going into the weekend, just an upper level high covering this entire area here. Pretty much centered over the Colorado, New Mexico area. So lots of warm, hot, relatively dry weather for Colorado. And then for next week, that upper level high just kind of parks itself over Colorado. A couple of waves working down southward into Texas, so we'll probably have some continued chances for precip here around the weekend and into next week. See, that's got kind of the appearance of a upper tropospheric trough right there, a little bit, kind of similar to like a Tut trough there. Okay, let's see here. Then towards the end, wow, that's some ridging unusually far north. High pressure right there. So it looks like some very hot weather coming up for Minnesota late next week over the Dakotas. And then down here in the southern U.S., we've got this deep easterly flow, so it's very tropical. That'll bring some... That'll probably just help continue to support the precip here. And then it looks like we start to get a little bit of ridging across Texas. That may start shutting things down. And no, it wants to bring back another upper level trough across Texas, so looks like kind of a mixed bag for our part of the country. And that's good because we don't want to be in a drought during the summer here in Texas. We've had enough of that here. Okay, let's see here. One last look at the chat before we sign off. I need to copy this to my clipboard so I can check that out later. Carl says he enjoys meeting with us on a regular basis, talking about weather. We have a common ground, fun in an ever-increasingly hostile world. It's a nice way to unwind, and that's one thing I'm kind of striving for here is to keep the broadcast consistent, because I know a lot of you have kind of a routine, and this is kind of a good time to check on the weather and kind of settle into things, and I know that because I follow some live streams like late at night, and it's good to have them there at the same time. So that's what I'm trying to do here on this broadcast. Let me give you the outside picture here, so you can check that out while I finish up. And Justin says until the tropical war zone hits, yeah, we're going to have the hurricane season coming up here in several weeks, and I have no idea what they're forecasting for the hurricane season. I know there's a couple of... I forgot the name of that professor. There's one who comes up with numbers for how many systems they're expecting, and I haven't really kept up on that, and so I don't really know what we're looking for this year. Hot weather late next week. Wonder if we'll get any ridge runners. Good question from Carl. And yeah, I think that's probably all I've got here. So let's see. Let me get my mixing board set here. Okay, so we're all set. Anyway, I appreciate y'all watching the webcast, and hopefully we'll see you all tomorrow. Take care and have a good evening.